Looks like the roster for the Blue Jackets for opening night is basically set. Are there some question marks in there? And what the heck are they going to do with the goalies? That's all coming up on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get things started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. Like I said at the top of the show, we're going to be talking about what the roster looks like now. We did this exercise a couple of months ago, I think, like not long after the season finished, where we were like, right, what does the roster look like? Where are the holes in the roster? Like, what's the optimum deployment of the players that we have, et cetera, et cetera. And now it looks like the roster is pretty much set. I don't think they're going to be bringing anyone else in. If they do, it'll be a surprise. Like, they're not going to be bringing in another defenseman. I don't think they'll bring in another forward, regardless of whether or not they need to bring in another forward. The only question mark is the goalies, and that's quite a small question mark because I think, again, for better or worse, they're going to be rolling with Jet and Elvis, at least to begin the season, right? I know that Waddell has talked a little bit about he wants to bring in a different goalie that is waivers exempt, that probably could just hop up and down when Elvis inevitably misses time. But we'll talk about the goalies last because I feel like I probably have some things to say about it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through what the forward situation is, what the defense situation is, what the goalie situation is, what I would do in terms of like deployment of players, and talk about, is there any kind of surprises? Obviously, the Blue Jackets just had development camp. Is there anyone that was at development camp that like is going to be pushing for a spot out of the gate, right? So just to with like straight up in terms of players that are on the roster right now, they have 13 forwards, 7 defensemen, and 2 goalies. So like they're basically set. They have room for one more player, which I assume will probably be a forward. But you know, I can't imagine they'll carry 3 goalies. They might carry 8 defensemen, but they carried 8 defensemen for a lot of last season. But I would imagine they probably want to add another forward, just in case of, you know, moving people in and out of the lineup. Injuries are inevitably going to be a problem. But let's talk about the players that are there, where they should play in the lineup, and you know, is there anyone missing, basically? So going off of Puckpedia, these are the 13 forwards that they have on the roster right now. This is this is, I was going to, not in any particular order. It's an order of most cap hit, biggest cap hit to smallest cap hit, just because that's the order that Puckpedia has them in. So we've got Sean Monahan, Charlie Coyle, Dmitry Voronkov, Kirill Marchenko, Boone Jenner, Matthew Olivier, Miles Wood, Cole Sillinger, Igor Chinikov, Kent Johnson, Isaac Lundstrom, and Adam Fantilli, and Zach Aston Reese. Now, there are a handful of other guys, like Mikhail Pucher is technically on the roster. He's an RFA that doesn't have a new contract yet, but they've taken guys like Williams and Delbo Blues off the roster now that it's clicked over to the 25-26 season. So that's your 13 forwards. Most of them fit pretty neatly into, you know, mostly where they were last season. So I have kind of put together like what I think the lineup could be / should be, and we'll kind of go from there. So on the top line, I've slid Voronkov back in on that top line. Voronkov, Monahan, Marchenko. I think that's probably how they start the season, right? Unless you know, Igor Chinikov, for example, comes into training camp and blows everyone away. Obviously, he started the season on that top line after Boone Jenner got injured at the end of preseason. And the Chinikov, Monahan, Marchenko line was actually pretty good right up until Chinikov got injured. But I think they're probably going to start with Voronkov, Monahan, Marchenko. I don't hate that. They were one of the best 5-on-5 lines in hockey last season in the NHL. If Voronkov comes into camp fit and you know, ready to go, I think that's going to be a really, really fun line. The second line is where it gets kind of interesting because obviously you've got Fantilli and Johnson, and for me, those two should be stapled together, and you find someone to play with those two guys, right? I've put Cole Sillinger there. Bringing in Charlie Coyle and Isaac Lundestrom as your third and fourth line centers has freed Sillinger up to move to the wing. I like him in the top six better than I like some of the other guys that it's kind of been floated around. I know people talk about putting Jenna there. Chinikov is also an option there. And I'll talk about Chinikov in a minute here, but I think I'd like Sillinger there. It gives them another option if, for face-offs, etc. I think Sillinger and Johnson in limited time worked pretty well last season. Obviously, Fantilli and Johnson worked pretty well. So if they can connect that, the final line of the triangle and see what Sillinger and Fantilli can play together as, that could be a really interesting one. I think Sillinger adds a little bit of I hate using the word snarl because I feel like I overuse it, but like he adds a little bit of like meanness to that line. He's gonna throw the body around. He's going to get involved. And hopefully what he's going to do is prevent Adam Fantilli from trying to fight anything that moves, because he tried to fight everything that moved like 7 times last season. And it was very stressful because I don't think Adam Fantilli should be using his hands for punching. He should be using them for scoring goals. And I think having Stillinger on that line, it's a good line. It's a young line. And adds a little bit of defensive capability or two-way capability as well as Fantilli continues to develop. I don't think that's the line that they'll go with. I think they'll probably put Jenna there, which I'm not mad about. Sillinger is very much a younger Jenna, I think. I think he has a higher ceiling in terms of offense, but I think they're probably going to be very similar players as they get kind of deep, especially as Sillinger gets deeper into his career. Now, the bottom six are, again, like there's probably going to be a lot of moving pieces as they figure out who goes where, right? Charlie Coyle is going to be the third line center. I could see him potentially jump up into that second line wing spot as well, depending on, again, if they can't find, if Jenner is struggling there, if Sillinger is struggling there, like I think Coyle is a fairly solid middle six guy, and I think that he could be potentially like the James Van Riemsdyk on that line. I think he brings a little bit more than Van Riemsdyk in terms of, again, like defense, and he's a center, so he can take faceoffs if he needs to, etc. That could be an option as well, but I've gone with Sillinger, so we're going to slot Coyle in at third line center, and I've given him Jenna and Mathieu Olivier as his line mates. That to me feels like a line that is going to be unpleasant to play against. I'll be really interested to see if Olivier can keep the offense that he found last season. Obviously, he was playing above his means for a lot of the season. I feel like he wasn't shooting like out of this world good. He was shooting high. He had a high shooting percentage, but it wasn't, he wasn't shooting at like 30% or anything like that. So I think it probably comes a little bit down to earth, but I'll be interested to see because Jenner was scoring at a pretty good clip at the end of the season, right? He came back from injury, and he only played 20, 30 games ish, but he had those 20 to 30 games. I thought he was pretty good in them. So I like that third line. I think it's got a little bit of offense. It's got a little bit of checking. It should be, knock on wood, a fairly good third line, right? I'm not expecting it to move the earth. I'm not expecting, the fireworks to go off whenever they're on the ice. But if the top two lines are struggling because they're getting tied up against the other top two lines, I think this third line could come in and cause some chaos, Fourth line, I've put Zach Aston Reese, Isaac Lundstrom, and Miles Wood. I don't love this as an option. I don't love Miles Wood as an option. He's fast and he hits a lot of things, but he doesn't really do that super effectively, right? Lundstrom I like. He's a defensive forward. You're not going to get points from him, but you're going to get face-off wins, and you're going to get not a lot of offense going on ever. It's probably going to be really boring hockey if he has his way, which I'm not opposed to on your fourth line, right? Zach Aston Reese is a fine fourth line player. The problem now becomes those are your top 12 forwards. Igor Chinikov is the big question mark of this forward roster to me, because when he's healthy, he is absolutely a top 6 option. Is he healthy? Can he stay healthy? He was red hot before he got injured, didn't play a ton. I think he only played about 15 or 20 games before he got hurt last season, missed a bunch of the year. I really thought it was a concussion. Apparently, it seems that it's been a back injury or potentially like a neck injury, which is, nasty. And again, he came back and clearly wasn't 100%. Couldn't stay in the lineup, and when he was in the lineup, wasn't really getting anything done because he was, buried in the bottom 6. He's not a bottom 6 player, which is why it's kind of, it's unfortunate. He's either a guy that you play in your top 6, or he doesn't have a spot in the lineup. Like, he's not going to be a guy that thrives on that third line with, with Coyle and Olivier. He's a guy that you potentially put with Monahan and Marchenko, or Fantilli and Johnson, and see how it goes. He played 30 games total this year. He got injured November 27th, didn't play again until March 4th. I think he played about 8 or 10 games after coming back from injury. So he only played about 20 games, but those 20 games he was reasonably good. 14 points in the 21 games, I think it is. So, again, if he's on, he's on. The question is going to be, is he on? The other thing is there are going to be kids knocking on the door, I think. There are a couple that I've kind of picked out here. Luca Del Barbaluz was excellent last season in, fairly difficult minutes for a guy who had, I think, like 5 minutes of NHL experience. I think he played 1 game the season before last, and then played when Monahan went down with the injury. Sillinger went down with an injury around about the same time. He came up, he played second line center minutes and was honestly very good in them, considering. He's a guy that I think is going to be pushing hard to make the NHL. He was one of the best players in the AHL this season, especially, before his call-up. After his call-up, he kind of flattened out a little bit, but so did everyone on the Monsters, so I'm not going to, really give him too much stick for that. The other guy is Jack Williams, who played 1 game at the end of last season, was a college free agent signing, came from Northeastern University, and just had a really, really good development camp. He is another guy that I'm not expecting him to make the roster. I am expecting him to be one of the last cuts, and I do think he's going to be really good for Cleveland this season. And I think if everything goes his way, he's going to be one of the first guys that they call up. Again, in case of injury, which I'm going to knock on wood. Obviously, I mentioned at the end there that, or at the beginning there, I should say, that I expect the Blue Jackets to carry 14 forwards. So here comes the options of, do you call Williams up as a 13th or 14th forward, give him the opportunity to get into the lineup? I don't think Miles Wood is going to go the distance in this lineup. He might surprise us. He might surprise everyone, but I would expect he's going to be the first option for a healthy scratch. I also don't expect Zach Aston-Reese to play every game. So, is someone like a Williams or a Del Barbaluz going to be an option if they want to carry 14 forwards? Possibly. I think if it's a case of press box, I think I'd probably prefer Williams to be in the press box and have Del Barbaluz playing, those 1C minutes in Cleveland. But if they're going to play him and they're going to play real minutes, Luca Del Barbaluz to me feels like they're going to have a really difficult decision to make when those opening night rosters are due at the end of training camp. So we'll see. Chinikov is the biggest question mark for me, right? If he's healthy, then he fits into the top 6. If he can't get into the top 6, then there's not really a place for him in the bottom 6 of the lineup either. And that's kind of really unfortunate. So I don't really know what's going to happen there. I hope he's healthy. If he is healthy, what I think happens is basically every left wing gets bumped down 1. So you put, not every left wing. I would keep Voronkov where he is, and then Chinikov second line, Sillinger third line, Jenna fourth line, or have a line of Sillinger, Coyle, Jenna, and then move Olivier down to the fourth line and have a fourth line of Aston Reese, Lundestrom, Olivier. the beauty of this is that, you're not locked into, you don't have to pick your lineup at the beginning of the season and then have everyone on that line for the rest of the year, right? So, this is all stuff that probably could happen, stuff that potentially happens. I'm not saying that this is what they have to stick to, but just looking on paper and looking at last season, looking at the new additions, this is kind of how I think the forward group could shake out. This is probably how I would have it shake out, but Chinakov's going to be the key there because a healthy Chinakov makes everything else more interesting. A unhealthy or a struggling Chinakovs is unfortunate, but does kind of solidify a lot of people in a lot of places, I think. Let's take a quick break. And when we get back, we will talk about the defense, which is much less complicated than the offense. But I was going to say a hot take. It's not really that hot of a take. It's a lukewarm take, but I want to talk about the bottom pair defensemen and what I would do versus what they're probably going to do. So we'll do that in just a second here at Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to tell you about FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing. Whether you are all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game more exciting. You're already following the action. You can make it even more thrilling. With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Whether I'm placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet ride into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I am part of the action. Are you new to FanDuel? New customers can bet just $5 and $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. That means that you can spend those bonus bets on whatever you want. Go find the heaviest favorite you can, put $5 on them, and you get $150 that you can spend on whatever you want. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We've talked about the forwards. Let's talk about the defensemen, which is a lot more solidified, in my opinion, than the forwards. There's just because there's less moving parts, there's 6 defensemen versus 12 forwards, right? Werenski-Fabro has to be the top pairing for me. I keep feeling like, and this might just be me making nothing out of nothing, or making something out of nothing, but I wonder if they're going to go back and try Werenski-Provorov at the start of the season. I wouldn't, personally. I think Werenski-Fabro was such a good pairing, and I think Provorov, the less he plays, the better. Quite honestly, I think he's more effective if he plays fewer minutes. And I also liked him with Matejchuk as well. Like, I thought that was a fine second pairing. That's the easy stuff, right? The hard stuff is, what do you do with that bottom pairing, right? You've got Damon Severson, who was Dane Everson's whipping boy for a lot of the season. You've got Erica Branson, who missed a ton of last season with an injury. And you've got Jake Christensen, who played well when he was in the lineup and couldn't really seem to get, consistency going again because there was so much moving around. Kind of lost his spot to Matejchuk, and didn't play a lot in the back half of the season, I feel like. I personally would have Christensen and Severson on that third pairing. I thought they were a good duo at the beginning of the season, shockingly so. And I think that Gabranson is... Frankly, Severson is a better option than Gabranson. I think Gabranson is great for vibes and leadership and, being an adult. I don't think he needs to be in the lineup every single night for any of those things to be true, right? Like we saw last season, he wasn't in the lineup and he was still, he was at every game. He was inviting the injured players to hang out. Like, I'm pretty sure that he, Boone Jenner, and Caden Lindstrom spent more time together than any other trio of Blue Jackets all season. And it's because they were all injured. So they would just kind of all hang out together while the team was on the road, right? And it clearly didn't have an impact on his ability to be a leader in that team. He came back, he was about as expected. Like, I like Eric Branson as a person. I do not think he is a particularly effective defenseman. Frankly, again, if you look at, obviously, it's going to, your top 4 is Werenski-Fabro, Matejchuk, Provorov. There's only 2 more spots. You're paying Severson more money. You can't put $6.5 million in the press box every single night. And both Severson and Gabranson are right-handed right-shot defensemen, and Christensen is a left-shot defenseman. So, I also like Jay Christensen a lot. I think he's got potential. I don't know how much more, I don't know how much more we have to go before he hits his ceiling, but again, in limited minutes last season and in sheltered minutes, I thought he was quite good. So for me, he would be an easy pick. And then you pick, do you want Gabranson with him or do you want Severson with him? And frankly, I'd probably take Gabranson. Excuse me, that was potentially Freudian. I would probably take Severson and have Gabranson as your 7th defenseman. The thing that makes the defense easier also is that you don't have guys knocking on the door to make the lineup, right? Like the defensive prospect pool is getting deeper after, it kind of, it looked great, and then they traded Juracek, and then a couple of guys kind of faded away. And now it's slowly starting to build it back up, right? You're adding Alec into the mix. You're adding Jackson Smith into the mix. I still think that there's an outside chance that Stanislav Svozil plays NHL games at some point, or more. I think he played a couple seasons ago when every defenseman was injured. But there's no one really, really knocking on the door and being like, they absolutely have to play over X, Y, or Z, right? So this is going to be your 7 defensemen. There are options in Cleveland for, injury, knock on wood. Damon Hunt is an option. Ostensibly, again, Svozil is an option. You've got options, right? But there's no one that I'm sitting here like this time last season we were like, Denton Matejchuk should absolutely be on this opening night roster, and if he doesn't, it's a travesty. There's no one in Cleveland right now, or there's no one on the outside looking in that I'm like, this guy needs to be on the roster, right? They brought in Yarosh, I think his name is. He was in the KHL the last couple of seasons. He's a very distant option, I think. He's probably going to be their first call if there is an injury, but for me anyway, he starts in Cleveland. He's not better than the 7 defensemen that they have on the roster right now, so I don't think he's an option. He might be an option, 2 months in when people are starting to get banged up, but for opening night, he's not an option for me. These are the 7 defensemen the Blue Jackets are rolling with, for better or worse, right? So that's, again, defenseman, much easier than the forwards. Less moving around. I expect that top 4 to stay intact pretty much all season. There'll be some moving around, to penalty kill pairings, and if guys are injured, knock on wood, etc., etc. But the top 4 is going to be the same basically all season. So it's really that 3rd pairing that's going to have movement. And I suspect they might just rotate the 3 guys in and out, depending on, again, who's playing well, how the team plays. The team's on a winning streak, then the 3rd pairing is probably going to stay put. The team's on a losing streak, they're probably going to rotate some guys around, right? That's just how the game works. Let's take another quick break, and then I want to talk about the goaltending, because we know who the goalies are going to be, but we don't know how much of each goalie we're going to get. So let's talk about that in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We've talked about the forwards, we've talked about the defensemen. Let's talk about the goaltending. For better or worse, the goalies this season are going to be Jet Greavves and Elvis Merzlikins. It doesn't look like any changes coming there. My guess is that Don Waddell is going to be very quietly trying to move Elvis out. But the goalie market is thin. I don't know. At this point, you might as well, the devil right? No one available is going to be an improvement on Elvis. I think it's just going to be changing a goalie for a goalie, right? Whether that goalie is Stu Skinner in Edmonton, we thought it might be John Gibson for a minute. Obviously, I think John Gibson is a better goalie than Elvis, but the fact remains, they didn't buy Elvis out. They haven't traded him away. I don't think that's for lack of trying, but they haven't traded him away. Tarasov is in Florida now. You've got Jet Greavves, who is no longer waivers exempt as of right now. That's your duo, right? So the question becomes, who's your starting goalie, right? And I don't think they're going to name one officially. It's going to be, we're going to play the hot hand, and both of our goalies are good enough to be starting goalies, and really it's a 1A, 1B situation. I suspect it's going to be similar to the start of last season, where they basically alternated both goalies for the first kind of month or so. For when both goalies were healthy, I should say. But it was Elvis played a game and then Tarasov played a game, and then Elvis played a game and then Tarasov played a game. And so I would expect that to happen again for the most part until one goalie starts outperforming the other. And, my money is on Jet Greavves outperforming Elvis. I think, again, last season was a very, very small sample size, but that's where sample sizes start, I think he has every opportunity to be the opening night starting goaltender. I'm going to be really interested to see if that's the case. I do suspect they might choose Elvis as their home opening starting goalie, which typically means that's who they think is going to be the starter, right? But schedule's not out yet. Last season, the Blue Jackets, I think, had 2 or 3 games on the road before they had their home opener. I remember it super clear because the season started the weekend I got married, so it was all a little bit fuzzy. But I think that they're probably going to start with Elvis getting the quote-unquote difficult start and Jet getting the quote-unquote easy start to begin with. For my money, Jet Greaves should probably get 50 games minimum. Most, that is still kind of a 1A, 1B situation, but I think young goalie wants to play, clearly can play, right? I think you've got to be careful with fatigue for him. The AHL is about as demanding on its goalies as the NHL is in terms of, minutes played and amount of games and travel, etc. But it'll be interesting to see how Greavves react to the higher level, because obviously the NHL is a step up from the AHL, right? I'm not saying that they're both the same, but the amount of minutes that he played in Cleveland last season has probably set him up well to play a lot of minutes in the NHL, right? Because a lot of the problems last season, or not a lot of the problems last season, but one of the problems ongoing with Elvis is not the most durable goalie in the world, right? He gets sick a lot. He gets fatigued a lot. He gets injured. Less so this season than previous seasons. He did get that concussion at the end of this season. I think he got a couple of bumps and nicks throughout the season. But Jet Greaves, knock on wood, has been an extremely healthy goalie for the Cleveland Monsters over the past, 3-ish seasons. He is clearly capable of taking the lion's share, and whether the team expects that of him or not, I do suspect that's the way it's going to go, right? Regardless of whether they want Elvis to be the starter, I just don't think he has the physical capabilities of playing more than 50 to 55 games, right? And honestly, that should be about how many, I don't think a starting goalie in the NHL should be playing more than 60 games. That to me feels like the upper limit. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that Connor Hellebuck played the most games this season. Okay, so Andrei Vasilevsky and Connor Hellebuck both played 63 games this season. Sam Montembeault played 62. Ilya Sorokin and Igor Shesterkin both played 61. They were the only 5 goalies to play over 60 games. And that to me feels like really the upper limit. And then, you consider that means that 63 games in an 82-game season, their backup goalie only played 19 games. It really, really should be more of a closer to a 2/3 split, I think. And if that's 50 to 55 games, your backup plays, 25 to 30 games, 27 to 32? That to me feels much more balanced, and I suspect that's what we'll see. If everything goes well, we'll see Jet Greaves getting the bulk of those starts and Elvis playing the backup role. I don't know that how Elvis will like that. My guess is not a ton. But I'll be interested to see how he responds to real competition. Because here's the thing. I like Tarasov a lot. I thought he has a lot of potential, and he's probably going to be great in Florida this season because that's how this works, right? But Elvis, I don't think, was ever really in a place where he had to be worried about losing his role to Tarasov last season. Because even though he missed a lot of time, when Tarasov was playing, they were basically the same, or Tarasov was worse, right? Like, he was winning games, but he was also allowing 4 or 5 goals every game. So I'll be interested to see what happens if Jet Greavves, I don't think he's going to keep up the stats that he had, last season, right? Which was truly insane. He allowed 21 goals in 11 games last season and had a 938 save percentage, right? I don't think he's going to hit that mark, but if you can get like a 910 out of Jet Greavves, it's going to make Elvis's job a lot more difficult. If Jet is allowing 2 or 3 goals a game and Elvis is allowing 3 or 4 goals a game, like it's going to get real interesting real quick, right? So we'll see. I still believe in Jet Greavves. Again, I know it's a small sample size, but kid's a gamer. I've watched him in Cleveland for a long time. Like, there's a goalie in there, and I think there's an NHL starting goalie in there. So all he's got to do is prove it, right? And I think they're going to give him every opportunity to do so. Evidenced at the end of last season, he jumped to Neil Tarasov in the depth chart. I'll be interested to see if he manages to jump Elvis, because obviously the reason he played all those games at the end of the season was because Elvis was injured. And I don't think Elvis returned before the end of the season. I think Elvis was out basically for the last 2 or 3 weeks of the season where Jet Greavves went sicko mode, right? So I'll be interested. That's another, for me, the biggest question marks on this roster. Igor Chinakhov, what do they do with him? What do you do with your goalies? Does Jet Greavves take over? Do they continue to run Elvis into the ground and put Jet Greavves in the backup? And I think that's probably going to be a mistake, let's say. But I'll be interested to see what happens. But that's your roster. For me, that's my opening night roster. So just to kind of run down it real quick, I've got Voronkov, Monahan, Marchenko on the top line, Sillinger, Fantilli, Johnson, second line, Jenna, Coyle, Olivier, third line, Aston Reese, Lundestrom, Wood, fourth line, defense pairings, Werenski, Fabro, Matejchuk, Provorov, Christensen, Severson, and then I've got Jet Greavves starting, backed up by Elvis as the opening night roster. That feels like the optimal roster. The way that this roster is constructed right now, that feels like the best way to deploy it, in my opinion. That's all I've got today. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode. I don't know what we'll talk about. I think we're going to talk about. I think we'll continue our player review, because there are still a bunch of guys that I want to talk about that are still on this roster. Like, I'm not gonna need to talk about like Justin Danforth, who is obviously gone now, but there are guys on this roster that I want to talk about. I haven't really talked about Denton Matejchuk's season, for example, and that's someone that I'm really interested to get into and dig apart the the underlying stats, etc., etc. So maybe we'll do that tomorrow. Maybe we'll talk about Denton Matejchuk tomorrow. Thank you for listening to this episode, for making it your first listen of the day every single day. Locked on Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Blue Sky at JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets on Twitter and LO-Blue Jackets on Blue Sky. Thank you once again for listening, and until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.